Welcome, everyone. My name is Marc Boney. I'm a teacher, author, and practitioner of the ancient astrological science of India, known as jyotish, probably better known here in the U.S. as Vedic astrology. And I'm here today to introduce to you a very interesting and unique aspect of jyotish, something referred to as Ashtakavarga. And it's unique in the sense that you'll not find it in any other form of astrology. And it has a variety of applications and uses, but one of its primary uses is to interpret and assess the effects of transits of planets. Transits mean where a planet is moving right now in the celestial sphere within the 12 zodiacal signs, and therefore it's how it's affecting every individual chart. So one of the primary uses of this system is to interpret and gauge the effect of transits. In fact, there's even a saying in the tradition that to interpret transits without the use of Ashtakavarga is actually a criminal act, which is fairly strong language. But as I go on here, I'm going to be showing you some examples of why this saying came into being. So I'm going to now share my screen here. So to begin my introduction of this topic to viewers, I have here a quote from what is considered probably the most authoritative text on jyotish, called Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. And the text is done in the form of a dialogue between the Jyotish Acharya, Parashara, the Jyotish teacher, and his main disciple, Maitreya. And every chapter always begins with a question from the disciple. And so if you just follow along with me here, O Venerable One, you have explained the combined effects of planets arising out of their positions in various houses and their different movements as accepted by many sages and learned teachers. It is not possible to understand and explain all these details owing to their sinful deeds and lack of proper intelligence in this Kali Yuga. Therefore, please tell me that astrological knowledge by which people even of low intellect can understand and by which they can know good and bad events and longevity clearly from transits of planets. This is from chapter 66, verses 1 through 4 of the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. And I've always found this introduction rather amusing because essentially what's being said here is that all the astrological knowledge and information that had been given previously might be too overwhelming for people to understand and make use of because we live in an age in which, the intellectual horsepower is not high. We live in this dark age. And therefore, Maitreya, the disciple, is saying, is there something that you can share with us that people even of a low intellect can make use of? And if you come to understand Ashtakavarga, you'll see that really the main requirement for using it is to be able to distinguish a higher number from a lower number, which of course, everyone can do. And so this is what's being said here, which I, as I said, always kind of found a little humorous. The Sanskrit word Ashtakavarga, as you can see here, is a compound composed of two words, Ashtaka, which simply means eightfold, and Varga means division. So Ashtakavarga means eightfold division. Eight here, or eightfold, is a reference to 7 of the 9 grahas: Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. 7 plus the Lagna gives 8. The nodes of the moon, Rahu and Ketu, are not included in the system, and you'll see the number 8 comes into play here in the system in a number of ways. First of all, in this way. Then you'll see that each of the 7 grahas in this system are assigned a certain number of bindus or benefic points that are available for them to distribute to each of the signs and whatever sign that house, whatever house that sign is in an individual's chart, and that they distribute these benefic points from 8 different locations. First of all, from their own natal position, and then secondarily from the natal position of every other of the grahas, excluding Rahu and Ketu, and then lastly from the birth lagna. So again, from 8 different locations, they're distributing these points. And these benefic point totals from each donor planet are distributed according to a set of rules that is unique for each. And these distribution rules are given in the ancient texts, but the rationale behind them is actually quite unknown. So each receiving sign/house builds up strength as it collects these benefic points that are contributed by the various grahas. And these collections of points in different signs/houses is the core concept of Ashtakavarga, as you'll see when I begin to illustrate. So these point totals that accumulate in the different signs have many applications in interpretation and can be used to shed light on different strengths and weaknesses of a birth chart, some of which actually may otherwise remain or be hidden. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the primary uses is to gauge the effects of transits using these totals, which I'm going to go on to illustrate here. But they can also be used to assess static potentials in the chart as well, potentials of birth. And so what I'd like to do now is share another document. One moment here. So, and I'll open this up here. I mentioned that each of the grahas are assigned a number of benefic points, and then they distribute those points from 8 different locations. And you'll see this from this table that I'm showing here. I'm using Jupiter distribution to illustrate. Jupiter is the strongest natural benefic, and accordingly, or fittingly, you might say, it has the most points to distribute, 56 benefic points. And it does so from its own position, the position of all the other grahas, excluding Rahu and Ketu, and also from the Lagna. And it just, it starts out with contributing a point to its own position. From certain of the grahas will have a point from the position of a particular planet, and then from there. So you see the X's here in the different boxes from the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and so on. You'll see from where from that point where they distribute this benefic point. And if you were to add up all these red X's, they would come to 56 benefic points. I show this just to give you a feel about how the totals that I'm going to be now showing you come about, how they're derived. So I'm going to begin to show you that by first showing you the chart of a former Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, who has some rather unique features in his birth chart. You'll see that his Lagna has 5 grahas, including the Lagna Lord's Sun. And of course, they form multiple, favorable yogas, particularly Raja yogas and Dana yogas, combinations for high status and high wealth, which he had. But now I want to show you what's called the Sarvashtaka, or the summary of points that, based on the unique distribution in his chart, as it applies to his chart, are then accumulating in the different signs, which are then, of course, related to the different houses in his birth chart. And so you see here, and this is referred to as the Sarvashtakavarga. Sarva means all, or altogether. And if you just take a moment to look at these, first of all, understand that the average number of points that can be accumulated in any sign is 28. So 28 becomes, you might say, baseline. And the idea here is that it helps measure the strength of a house. It's not the only way in which the strength of the house is measured. Other, standard astrological principles apply, but this can give you an additional insight, an additional data point with regards to the houses and their strength. So the idea here is that any house that has at least 28 points is in good shape that way. It's, you might say, average. It has baseline strength. If it starts to go under that, it becomes weaker. And if it's like 21 or below that, as you can see here, that pertains to his 7th house Aquarius, which has only 19 points. And then it starts to become significantly weak. But if it starts to become, say, like 30 points and above, then it starts to become significantly strong. Now, in his case, you'll see that his 11th house of gains has a whopping strength, an enormous strength of 50 points, something that is something you'll see that is rather rare. But one of the patterns that are given in the ancient texts that is said to be, a particularly favorable pattern this way is when you have a reasonably high point total in the 10th house, which of course has to do with your activity in the world and to some degree your status in life. And then, but a much then higher point total in the 11th house, the next house. The 10th house shows your activity in the world, and the second house from there, which is the 11th house, shows your gains from that. And so it's the idea here, if you've got a high point total in the 10th, that's good, but then if you have a much higher point total in the 11th, it's like you, for less effort, you get more gains, is the idea there. And then along with that, you want to see there a lower point total in the 12th house, which has to do, of course, with losses and expenses. And here you see a tremendous differential, both between the 10th and the 11th house, and an even much greater one between the 11th and 12th house here. And this was viewed as being, a favorable pattern to have. And in the charts of many, renowned, highly successful people or people who reached a high status in life, you'll oftentimes see this pattern, although not invariably. Now, if I can show you here the chart of a former U.S. president, Lyndon Johnson, you'll see a really strong similarity in certain ways to the chart of Rajiv Gandhi, in that he was also Leo Lagna and also had 5 grahas in the first house, again forming very strong and multiple Raja and Dana yogas, combinations for status and wealth. And then now if I show you his Sarvastika totals, again, you'll see a rather similar pattern. He actually has a higher point total in the 10th house there, 36, significantly strong, and then almost an equally high point total in the 11th, 48. Rajiv Gandhi had 50, but then even a lower point total in the 12th. So we have this differential where the 10th is strong, the 11th is much stronger, and then the 12th of loss and expenses goes down precipitously. It's really quite a differential here, a full 28 points between the 11th and the 12th. And so I'm just giving you one example here, the way in which these Sarvastika totals for each sign, and therefore as it relates to each house and individual horoscope, some of the ways in which it can be used to interpret static potentials in the chart. Now, besides having a total point total, a total number of points for each sign, each planet in each sign comes to a particular total itself, in which case that's referred to as the planet's Banashtika. It's how many points that individual planet accumulates in that sign. And I'm showing you here the chart of a name, if you're a baseball fan in the U.S., you'll certainly recognize Pete Rose. He's, someone who was a legendary baseball player, not contemporary. He actually holds the records for the most hits in a career. And you'll see that he has some interesting contrasts in his chart, in the sense that there are 3 exalted planets, but then you'll also see 3 planets in their debilitation sign. 2 of those debilitated planets, in Mercury and Saturn, are with exalted planets, which of course is a factor for Nichabanga, or the cancellation of that debility. But zero in on his Mars, which you can see here is his 2nd and 9th lord falling in the 11th in its exaltation sign Capricorn, giving what would be called a Dhan Yoga, combination for wealth. Of course, he made millions in his playing career. But of course, Mars is also the karaka, or the significator of competitiveness for athletic competition. So it pertains to sports. for the ability to be aggressive. And actually, in his career, he was known as being intensely, incredibly competitive. He actually had a nickname, Charlie Hustle, which means he would do anything to try to make a play that could help his team win. So he had a very, very strong, powerful Mars. Well, if we look at Mars's individual point total for Capricorn, which is what this graphic illustrates, you'll see that it actually has the highest point total possible. Here, the average is 4, and the maximum number of benefic points any planet can accumulate it would be 8, and the lowest would be 0. So you can see here, Capricorn, for his Mars, has the highest point total possible, which reveals now, you might say, a deeper underlying strength to a planet that was already very strong by virtue of falling in its exaltation sign. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that Ashtakavarga can sometimes reveal both hidden strengths and weaknesses in a chart. And so I wanted to give an illustration of that. Some of you hopefully would recognize the name Bonnie Raitt. She's a Hall of Fame pop musician, still active, singer, songwriter, legendary guitarist. She, in her chart, you'll see that Jupiter is in its debilitation sign. Although if those of you are a little more advanced, if you see its degrees, you'll see that it's going to fall into its debilitation sign in Navamsha, which means it's in this condition of Vargotama, which can really offset some of the weakness that might normally come about for it being in its debilitation sign. But I'm focusing in on the Jupiter period because it was in this major period, this Mahadasha of Jupiter, that she had her initial success as a popular musician, got recording contracts, had albums and so on and so forth. And this can be seen by virtue of the fact that Jupiter is the 9th lord in the 10th, giving what's called Raja Yoga, combination for success and elevation. But because of Jupiter's weaknesses, being in its debilitation sign here, that could indicate that the fruit of that yoga might be more minimal. But with her, it was reasonably good. And one of the reasons, as I would see it here, if you look at the individual point total for Jupiter, specifically in Capricorn, you'll see that it's a very strong 7 out of 8 bindus or benefic points. And so, without seeing this, you would maybe judge Jupiter to not be able to give its results rather strongly, but a combination of both it being Vargotama and then also having this very high individual total within Capricorn, its sign of debilitation actually indicated that it could give a reasonable level of Raja Yoga, which it did. Extending that thought further here, I'm showing you the chart of Dr. Deepak Chopra, again, a name I would think most everyone would recognize. And I want you, again, to zero in on his Jupiter. You see that it falls in his 9th house in a very complex configuration with 3 other grahas. For anyone with Aquarius Lagna, Jupiter has a sort of special money, prosperity-giving ability since it rules both the 2nd house and the 11th house. Placed as it is here, particularly in the 9th house of Bhagya, or fortune, or luck. And it was shortly after moving into the Jupiter Mahadashas when he really started to get his rise in the world. He started authoring books, very popular books. He started, doing a lot of speaking engagements, was appearing on things like the Oprah Winfrey Show. And the long and short of this, during this Mahadashi, he became a world-renowned, world-famous figure, and became, quite wealthy from his activities. Now, if you look at Jupiter here, if you looked at its position both in the birth chart and Navamsha, its dignity is actually completely unremarkable. And there's no real evident source of strength. If you looked at different quantitative measures in Jyotish for this planet's strength, you would see that it was also rather unremarkable there. But now I'm going to show you its individual Banashtaka, specifically for Jupiter. in Libra, and you can see here it's quite healthy. 6. It's not as high as Pete Rose, which was 8. It's not as high as Bonnie Raitt's, which was 7. But anything over 4 starts to make it significantly strong. So these are examples of how Ashtakavarga can be used to, as I said, assess static potentials in a birth chart. In this case, see certain strengths of planets that may not be obvious in other ways. And of course, if those planets are involved in favorable yogas and the person runs those dashas, well, that's when you see the effect in their life, which is what we saw here in the case of Dr. Chopra. One more example of this, I'm showing you the chart of Hollywood movie star Kevin Costner, who had his greatest success, had his greatest fame in his Venus Mahadasha. It was actually in the sub-period of the moon here, which you can see those two are together, when he directed, I think he was involved in the script, and he starred in this movie called Dances with Wolves that won multiple Academy Awards. It was, I think, something of a peak of his career success. But certainly all of his major success came in most of his major success came in his Venus Mahadasha, long dasha, 20 years. And again, if you look at Venus's, you notice it's in the 3rd house of the dramatic arts here, for one. And if you looked again at its dignity, I think it would be that of a great enemy in the birth chart, and then also an enemy in the Navamsha. So there's really no obvious source of strength in terms of the planet's dignity here. And again, if you looked at the quantitative measures, things like Vimshapaka Bala and Shadbala, you would see also that it's rather unremarkable. But now, if I show you its point total, its individual point total in Scorpio, again, we see a very, very high 7 out of 8. And so these are illustrations of how, by using a planet's individual point total, again referred to as the Vinashtaka, sometimes a hidden strength can be revealed, and therefore it's an important thing to assess when a person's running a particular Mahadasha and you're trying to see different things about it and the kind of results that can give. So lastly, I want to show the example of what it's meant when we say you use Ashtakavarga in order to interpret transits and to assess the kind of effects that they're going to give. Most people, again, should probably recognize the name Angelina Jolie. And if you get exposed to the media, then you've probably heard she's made headlines lately because of her decision to leave her marriage from Brad Pitt. They are divorcing. And this has happened just within the last couple of months here. So first of all, I want everyone to note that for her, Saturn is the lord of her 7th house of marriage. So part of the idea here is that the transit of Saturn, because it's her 7th lord, has significance in terms of developments in her relationship and marriage life. And so you need to understand that Saturn, for about 2.5 years now, has been moving through Scorpio. Starting in January, it's going to move out of Scorpio and go into Sagittarius, but currently in Scorpio during this time that her marriage has been, very stressed from what I understand, and then obviously came to a breaking point. If we look at both the Sarvastika, that is the summary total of benefic points in Scorpio, you see that it's the lowest amongst all her houses. It has a mere 22 benefic points. Remember that when things start to go below 28, they start to get weak. If they start getting in the early 20s, as hers is here, then it starts to become significantly weak. And but then what's really also very telling is if you look at her, I should have had a screen here that said that the individual Vinashtika point total for Saturn is a merely 1 point out of 8. So very, very low. So the idea being here is that if you were interpreting transits and the effects of transits in her life based on her chart, and you saw that Saturn, the planet who rules her seventh house, is moving through Scorpio, you could see that, predictably from that standpoint, it could bring a very, very challenging time in her marriage because it has a very low individual sarvastika. But then its point total, I can't really show you here, but if you looked it up in a good program, you'd see that it's just 1 out of 8, so very, very low. Lastly, I want to show you a chart here of an individual who, in their major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Rahu, they obtained their highest position that they had achieved in life in the corporate world. They achieved an executive position in a big, multi-million-dollar corporation at their highest rate of compensation. And this can be seen partly because Jupiter is forming a Raja Yoga with Saturn. It's a combination of the 5th Lord and the 7th Lord, so an angle trine combination, with Rahu giving the results of Saturn since, Rahu is in Saturn's sign. So Dasha-wise, this explains how a person could be elevated in this kind of position at this time. But then also transits play a part, and in which case classics of Jyotish tell us that one particularly significant transit always is the transit of the Dasha Lord. So again, recall that this person was running their Jupiter major period. Well, in the further statements that you'll find in the classes of Jyotish is that when the Dasha Lord is moving through signs where it has a good dignity, in its sign of exaltation, in its own sign, or the sign of a great friend, one can expect good or better, more favorable results. And if it's going through signs of its debilitation, or signs where it's in the sign of a great enemy, and so forth, then less favorable results will ensue. Well, as it happens, this individual got this elevation in the period of time when Jupiter, their Dasha Lord, was going through Capricorn, which would seem something of an anomaly, something of a paradox, because, of course, Capricorn is Jupiter's debilitation sign. But if you see this person's, both their Sarvastika and the individual Banashtika for Jupiter in Capricorn, it tells a different story. So you see here that for this chart, Capricorn actually has very strong Sarvastika total, 38. It's actually the second highest of all the totals in this particular chart. And even more significantly, you'll see that Jupiter has 7 out of 8 points for Capricorn for this particular chart. So this is what I meant earlier, that it's about the statement that to interpret transits without the use of Ashtakavarga is considered a criminal act, because in this case, if you just went by this principle of Jupiter being in its debilitation sign, it's the Mahadasha Lord, this is going to be unfavorable time, then you'd go completely wrong. But if you did what the classics of Jyotish want us to do, which is interpret transits using Ashtakavarga, then you would see that actually for this individual, the transit of Jupiter, the Mahadasha Lord, through the sign of Capricorn could actually prove quite favorable, which it did. So those are some illustrations showing both how the Ashtakavarga is utilized to interpret transits and also the static potentials. Excuse me a moment while I get what I need here. All right. So I wanted to make people aware that upcoming here, I'm going to be doing a 4-hour webinar on this topic. And the title of the webinar, as you can see here, is Ashtakavarga Decoded. Subtitle is Practical Applications, Level 1. And this is going to be a 4-hour webinar. And as you can see here, the date is Sunday, December 4th. And the time is going to be from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 8 hours west of Greenwich Mean Time. And really the only requirement for this, you don't have to have any background or previous involvement or understanding of Ashtakavarga, but it does require a basic understanding of the Parashari system of Jyotish. And if you'd like to learn more about the webinar, the details of that here, here's the type of things that are going to be covered. First of all, I'm really going to talk a lot about what is considered, in my view, the correct method for calculating Ashtakavarga that gives accurate results, because in the ancient text there is some differing view there. And then, as I talked about, the use of this system for assessing the static potentials in a birth chart. And then unique method for using Ashtakavarga to assess Graha Bala, which I showed you an illustration of, and therefore qualifying the strengths of yogas. And then, also the importance of, using this system to evaluate the effects of trances, which I also talked about. And then, the critical role of Ashtakavarga in assessing the effects of one of the most dreaded, you might say, or feared trances, which is referred to as the Sadhisati, which is the 7.5-year period where Saturn is transiting the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after the moon. And also I'll be addressing some controversies about Ashtakavarga and what I see as being their resolution through researches. So these are the things that in that 4-hour webinar a person would learn. If to learn more or to potentially register, I invite you to visit my website, which is simply www.marcboney.com. Marc is with a C, so marcboney.com. And if you find yourself attracted, I'd be pleased to have you involved. And so for now, I say to everyone, all viewers, namaste, and wishing you well.